It's Around the House. When it comes to remodeling and renovating your home, there is a lot to know, but we've got you covered. This is Around the House.
Welcome to Around the House Show, the next generation of home improvement. I'm Eric G. Thanks for joining me today. This is our midweek update. This is the stuff that didn't make it into last weekend's show. It's not going to make it into this weekend's show. And we got a couple big things to talk about today. First off, we're going to talk about the new real estate marketplace out there, how it's changing home buying for just about everybody. And then we're going to talk about mold and water in the basement, some huge problems we've been having with the storms, whether you're in the Midwest or the East Coast. We've got some big problems I want to talk about today. First off, let's talk today about the huge problem out there in the real estate market that is shaking it up this last week. And that is because of a lawsuit against basically the realtors out there. And we're going to not get too deep in the weeds here because it's a boring conversation, but we're going to talk about what changes everything for you. Now, if you're going to go out looking for a home this weekend, you're like, we're going to go buy a house, we're moving, I got to go buy a house. You're going to see some things if your agent is an actual realtor, and most of them are. I think there's 1.4 realtors out there, which are National Association of Realtors out there. That is their little group. Now, that's where the lawsuit was that this last year, that class action lawsuit that changed how these transactions go across the country. But there's about 100,000 agents or so out there, if I was to guess, that are not members of that are not realtors. And realtor is a trademark. It is a member of an organization. So that's what that is. Now, this affects this because how we used to do home buying was interesting. If I was going to go out and look at a home, traditionally, I would go talk to a realtor, and I would talk to them. They would walk me around and show homes. Well, the homes that they were taking me to would traditionally have in the listing, hey, we're going to split the agent's fees. So maybe 3% would be covered, would be what the seller is making, and 3% of what the buyer would be making. And that's for the agents. So you'd have about a 6% cost. Now, because of this lawsuit settlement, there's a completely different world out there. And this is how it's going to work. So that's how that transaction would happen. And then, of course, the seller would pay that 6% at the end as part of the closing costs and the fees. That's what that was. So if that's a lot of money, if you're talking like a $400,000 house, that's like 12 grand from each party that is now going to have to pay that. And here's why. So what you have now is that you have before, if I was going to go look at a house this weekend, I would call up my buddy who's my realtor and say, hey, I want to go look at houses. They're going to have to sit there. If they're one of these realtors, they're going to have to sit there and sign a contract with you and disclose to you that you're going to pay them 3% of the sale price of the house. So again, that's $12,000 if it was a $400,000 house, for instance, more or less, depending on the price of the house. So you're going to negotiate that 3%. Maybe you can get 2%, maybe you can get 1%. But here's the thing. There's a lot of costs associated with being a realtor. You're taking people around, you've got hours and hours, you're negotiating, you're doing all those things. And so what you're going to see is if you want that same level of service, you're going to have to negotiate probably that 2 or 3% for them to go around and do that for you. Now, if you want to go all cowboy and take it out on your own and you're going to try to find somebody that'll do it for 1% or half a percentage point, like many things out there when it comes to service, you're going to get what you pay for. So I just want to give you a buyer's beware of the people out there doing cut rates. This could be a problem, and you're probably not going to get that level of service. I know realtors out there that are showing up for all the inspections because the homeowner's working. They're making sure that things are going off just beautifully, helping set up moves, all that high level of service that you see some of these professionals doing. Now, here's a way I think around it that we'll see if this plays out or not. But I think what happens is, let's say you go in and say, okay, I'm going to pay the 3%, and my agent takes me around. I go, this is the house I have to have. So you've got that house. You're going to put an offer in for that $400,000, let's say. What I think you're going to see now is people putting offers in and say, I'm going to put in an offer for $412,000. Now, I want that seller to give me a $12,000 credit to help pay for closing costs, or AKA my real estate professional that's taking me around, that realtor. So I think you're going to see things shift this way. I don't think it's going to, I can guarantee you it's not going to lower housing prices, which was the crazy thing out there. Oh, we're going to do this to lower housing prices. No, if we're going to lower housing prices, here's my take. We need to change government regulations. We need not have cities charging 20, 30, 50, 80, $90,000 just to hook up into the sewer system and have those development fees on a lot that's already been developed. We need to change some of these regulations to make it easier for builders and cheaper to build inside the city where those development fees just aren't there. A lot of times those development fees are they're paying for the building department. So there's got to be a better way of doing that. And I think I see some things like that in the future. And then, of course, changing some zoning laws so we can put more homes in places that, of course, we've got problems with in the past. So it's up to us as humans out there to change these things. We're not going to have the government fix us for us because, as we know, they're really great at making things more expensive. Rarely see them ever make things less expensive. So as consumers out there and as citizens, it's going to be our job here in the United States to come up with solutions locally and fix some of these problems. So if your city is charging tons of money for development fees, ask these questions and find out. That's how we're going to change some of these problems. And then again, we're going to want to make sure and get kids into trade schools as well, because if we're going to be paying a laborer out there $85,000 because that's the cheapest we could pay somebody a year to be working around because we don't have any kids learning skills in high schools or trade schools, that's on us as well. So that's something we're going to have to fix. So there's some other issues, but I can promise you there's not going to be any lowering of house rates because we changed a couple percentage points of an ability of a consumer to work with an agent to negotiate those prices. So I get it. You're going to have some more options. Instead of those two agents negotiating that price between them at the time of the sale, before they go into putting an offer in and putting that together, now you're going to be working with your agent. They're going to be working with their agent. And now you're going to be trying to figure out the whole negotiation, the closing cost to see if they can help pay for that 3% or whatever you've negotiated out. So that's the big one right there. Second up here, I wanted to talk about some big problems we're seeing with all this rainfall in the United States right now. A lot of other countries fighting it in certain areas. Canada's had their own issues in places. We sure have it time to time here where I'm located in the Pacific Northwest. Here is the problem. If you have water in your basement and you're not watching the humidity down there and monitoring it, you could have a big problem. And the reason is if you're over 60% relative humidity down there and it's getting up into the rest of the house, I promise you that air is coming up into the house. At least 60% of that air in the crawl space and basement make it up into the living quarters just because hot air rises. And that air is going to always move around in there, and that's going to be a problem. So you want to make sure you get that under control. Monitor humidity. If you've got water down there, deal with it. Make sure it's taken under control because keep everything away from the walls. Make sure you got stuff off the floor. That way you can have proper airflow down there and get that water and moisture out of there. You don't go out and buy some of those little tiny dehumidifiers. Those aren't going to solve the problem for you. So if you get down to your Target or Home Depot and buy those little dehumidifiers, don't. Take a look out there. You need to put something in that's going to be built into your HVAC system, if that is a conditioned space, or mount in a more residential/commercial unit that is mounted up permanently, has a hard plumbed line. You can get that water out of there. And that's what it's going to take. If you're buying 3 or 4 of those dehumidifiers down there, one, it's costing you a lot of energy to do it. And those things can be fire hazards. There's millions of them on recalls right now. Make sure and check yours because that could be its own fire hazard right there. But you're not going to solve it with those little ones. Get the right unit. Take a look. There's a ton of brands out there that are right here in the United States that are great. Santa Fe is one of them. Pick your brand, do your research, get something that's going to fit the square footage of the entire house or at least down in that basement. Make sure you've got that dialed in because otherwise, when it's coming into wintertime and you got high humidity, I promise you, if it's 60% humidity downstairs, those mold spores are going to be making it upstairs. And if you've got over 60% in the entire house, you got mold growing in closets and boxes and everything else. And that's when you better start doing some air testing and check out like Examine Air. Check out Caroline Blazowski's Healthy Home Expert. She's America's Healthy Home Expert. She's got her thing going there. Let her work with you on trying to figure this stuff out because you have got a big disaster on your hands. Just make sure that you've got that under control. Monitor the humidity. Stop the water. And like I've always said in all of my pieces on there, when I do these things, make sure that those gutters and those downspouts are getting at least 10 feet outside of the perimeter of the house. So that way you've got that dialed in, because I tell you what, that water is going to get back in there. And if you've got a sump pump and it's draining right outside, you've got a fountain going round and round and round. And if you've got to clean up mold around there, do not use bleach. Get concrobium or one of the different mold cleaners, clean it up. And it's always best to test it before you clean it, so you know what you're working with. Some of that stuff is you can handle. Some of that stuff can give off really toxic stuff, microtoxins, things like that that'll get around the house. So understand what you're working with before you tackle it. Just don't use the bleach. It's not going to work. And plus, then you're going to give off all that chlorine in the house anyway, and that's not good for you there. All right, guys, we got an amazing show coming up this weekend. I can't wait to show you that on Friday. And if you're a member of our premium stuff, you'll be able to catch the stuff on Thursday, because that's when we air that stuff for a premium membership. It's $4 a month. Find out more, head over to aroundthehouseonline.com. Get the shows a couple days early, and of course, you get back into the back catalog, which I think now has over 1,000 episodes back there, so you can catch all the old stuff and go back into the Wayback Machine. All right, everybody, if you want to find out more, head to Around the House Online. I'm Eric G., and if you're watching on YouTube, like, subscribe, and of course, ring that bell so you get notified when the new stuff comes up. We'll see you Saturday. Thanks for tuning in to Around the House. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so you get notified when we bring you new content.